Now, let me introduce the next speaker who will be participating by telepresence, Dr. Frank von Hippel. He is a nuclear physicist, a professor of public and international affairs emeritus with Princeton University's program on science and global security. He worked with Andrei Sakharov personally as a fellow member of the board of directors of the International Foundation for the Survival and Development of Humanity, which operated out of Moscow in the 1980s. And Professor von Hippel was a recipient of the award of the Forum on Physics and Society in 1977 and the Leo Szilard Award in 2010. Professor von Hippel, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Professor Vorobieff. Can you, is everything working? Okay, thank you. Yes, I did know, had the privilege of knowing Sakharov for a couple of years as a fellow member of the board of this foundation, which he named the International Foundation for the Survival and Development of Humanity. I complained that the title was a little long, and he said, well, what do you want to leave out? Survival, development, humanity? And the debate was over. Sakharov wrote a two-volume memoir of his life, which he kept up to date until he died. The first volume covered his life up until 1987, and the last volume covers the last 3 years of his life after he returned to Moscow from exile in Gorky. This is about Sakharov's contributions to nuclear arms control. I'll talk a little bit about how our efforts to continue those contributions within the APS in my last slide. But Sakharov believed it was necessary for the Soviet Union to have nuclear weapons to deter US nuclear threats. But he had no illusions about fighting or winning a nuclear war. And this quote here is the picture he painted, the consequences of a nuclear war in 1968, when he first emerged as a public figure after his life as a nuclear weapon designer in this secret weapons lab at Artemis. A complete destruction of cities, industry, transport, and systems of education, a poisoning of fields, water, and air by radioactivity, a physical destruction of the larger part of mankind, poverty, barbarism, a return to savagery, and a genetic degeneracy of the survivors under the impact of radiation, a destruction of the material and informational basis of civilization. This is a measure of the peril that threatens the world as a result of the estrangement of the world's two superpowers. And of course, now we have a third superpower, China, which has recently begun to build up its nuclear arsenal at a very rapid rate. So I'll talk about three contributions that Sakharov made to ending atmospheric nuclear testing, to breaking the impasse over Star Wars, which is a period when I knew him, and what he had to say, which is relevant to our current debate in the United States over silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. There was concerns about the genetic effects of radioactivity from atmospheric testing that first turned Sakharov into an activist, initially as an insider. In the US, the famous physical chemist Linus Pauling had similar concerns and got thousands of scientists to sign a petition to put pressure on the US and UK governments to agree to a ban on tests in the atmosphere. In fact, famously, Pauling picketed the White House before going in for a dinner to which President Kennedy had invited all US Nobel Prize winners. Sakharov estimated the US and the Soviet Union set off about 550 megatons of explosive power in the atmosphere. Sakharov estimated that for every megaton, there would be 10,000 human victims from cancers and other genetic effects. And he focused especially on 5,700-year half-life carbon-14, which would made by nitrogen capture of neutrons from atmospheric nuclear explosions. That he was concerned would pollute the carbon pool that we and the rest of the living Earth's living systems share. So on that basis, he would have estimated about 5.5 million victims. The current estimate is not that far. That in fact, when that there will be 3 million cancer cases as a result of that period of atmospheric testing, half fatal. Although it may be reduced fortuitously by the dilution of that carbon-14 by all the fossil carbon that we're pouring into the atmosphere. Maybe one good effect of our carbon emissions. Sakharov supported Khrushchev's moratorium, test moratorium in 1958 to 61. And he, in fact, proposed what we and other countries are doing since the moratorium on nuclear testing since 1998. Which was what we call science-based stockpile stewardship, basically laboratory experiments and computer modeling instead of testing. But when he made his appeal to Khrushchev that the multi-megaton, actually up to 50 megaton explosions that the Soviet Union was planning at the time, Khrushchev's answer was, "I'd be a jellyfish and not chairman of the Council of Ministers if I listened to people like Sakharov." This was in a period of building confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, which climaxed with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Well, and finally, actually, and then Sakharov urged that it be abandoned, at least on tests in the atmosphere. And in fact, this was achieved in 1963 after the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the US and Soviet Union wanted to demonstrate to the public that they weren't completely crazy. In ballistic missile defense, Sakharov writes in his memoirs that he and the majority of his colleagues in the late 1960s concluded that, in fact, that anti-ballistic missile defensive systems could be neutralized, easily neutralized, at much less cost than the cost of deploying them. And also expressed the concern that deploying of ABM systems would be dangerous since they could upset the strategic balance, which means that to the extent that the other side thought the system might be effective, that would incentivize them to strike first, so that they wouldn't have a depleted missile force if they struck second. And the ineffectiveness of ABM systems was recently reasserted by a panel in which I served, the panel of a study panel sponsored by the APS panel on public affairs, and which concluded that in fact the current U.S., after spending $350 billion, the U.S. had deployed a missile defense system that even North Korea could easily counter and penetrate. Unfortunately, George Bush Jr. took the U.S. out of the ABM treaty in 2002, which has precipitated offensive buildups by both Russia and China, based on worst case assessments that maybe we could make our defensive system effective. I was a witness to Sakharov's activism during the Gorbachev-Reagan period, when he was allowed back to Moscow at the end of 1986. There was an impasse in the discussions between Gorbachev and Reagan on nuclear arms reductions, because Gorbachev was putting a condition on proceeding with nuclear reductions that Reagan freeze his strategic defense initiative, which many people called Star Wars because it was so fantastical. They actually in Reykjavik, just before Sakharov spoke out, the two agreed on the most important treaties, but it was again conditioned. And these treaties were the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and the START Treaty. But Gorbachev once again conditioned Soviet ratification of these treaties on a freeze of the Strategic Defense Initiative. Well, when Sakharov spoke out, and this was at an event that I co-organized in February 1987, he described this Strategic Defense Initiative as a Maginot Line in space, expensive and ineffective, and he argued that Gorbachev should forget about it, that the Strategic Defense Initiative would collapse under its own weight, which it did, and that he should just sign these treaties. And in fact, shortly thereafter, Gorbachev did sign those treaties. Now, with regard to silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles, at that same speech in the forum, Sakharov said that and we're debating this issue now of silo-based intercontinental ballistic missiles in the United States. He said a large part of the Soviet Union's thermonuclear capabilities in powerful silo-based missiles with multiple warheads. Such missiles are vulnerable to preemptive strike by the modern, highly accurate missiles of the potential enemy. A country relying mainly on silo-based weapons may be forced in a critical situation to launch a first strike. So today, silo-based ICBMs constitute the principal source of military strategic instability. Well, in fact, he was right. And today, ever since the late 1970s, US-based Minuteman ICBMs which are based in silos, as shown in this picture I have on my slide, have been on a hair trigger launch on warning posture. There have been a number of false warnings. Some of them have only been identified as false after the time allocated to the early warning crews to make that recommendation. And they were fired as a result of taking too much time to save the world. Former Secretary of Defense Perry and many others, including myself, have urged that we retire our silo-based ICBMs. But at the moment, Congress is funding the development of a new missile to replace our Minuteman missiles in these same silos. So this is something that activists really in the arms control area really need to engage with. So my final slide, well, I have two actually. Sakharov contributed importantly to the development of the U.S.-Soviet deterrence relationship while he was a weapons designer, but he was not at all comfortable with mutually assured destruction. As an insider, he helped achieve the atmospheric test ban and the ABM treaty. And as an outsider, he helped Gorbachev and Reagan achieve the treaties that actually reduced nuclear weapons, the INF and START treaties of the late 80s and early 90s. He did his weapons work as a brilliant cog in a huge bureaucratic machine. His arms control work he did as an autonomous human being. And then I do have a final slide. And this is, if you want to carry on the work of Sakharov and others to prevent nuclear war, and a danger that we're very conscious of currently in the context of this crisis over Russia's invasion of Ukraine, I invite you to join the Physicists Coalition for Nuclear Threat Reduction. This coalition was established 18 months ago under the auspices of the American Physical Society. In fact, the American Physical Society Innovation Fund has contributed $100,000 a year to the coalition for its first 2 years. We have, we've been, a core group of us have been giving colloquia around the country, physics colloquia around the country on trying to explain what the current situation is with regard to the dangers of nuclear weapons use and policy initiatives that we could undertake to reduce that danger. So far, with the blessings of the APS, we've lobbied Congress on 3 issues to urge the president to extend the New START Treaty, which is the last U.S. arms control treaty standing. And in fact, President Biden did that within, it was about 10 days left before it was going to expire when he became president. We've urged Congress not to fund a resumption of U.S. underground testing, which is something that the Trump administration was interested in. And in fact, in the negotiations between the House and the Senate on the defense authorization, the annual defense authorization, where the Senate had put funding for a resumption of U.S. nuclear testing, they agreed to take that out. And we have been urging recently President Biden to adopt a no first use policy for nuclear weapons. That's in the context of the Biden administration's nuclear posture review which is still ongoing, but maybe released as early as next month. So if you would like to join the Physicists Coalition, I show here a link to this webpage on the APS site. It's policy/nuclear. And also there is our one staff member, Charlotte Sultan, can be found at this meeting in the exhibition hall, I think at room F1 on level 3. And you could find out more about the coalition there and even sign up if you are so inclined. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much. And I'll unshare my stuff here.
Questions, please. We have plenty of time. Tatiana, please. Is that mic live?
Frank?
Yes.
Nice to see you. If only virtually, to be with you again. I have first of all, thank you very much for your remarks. I think it's very important that you have listed Sakharov's contributions to the deterrence and to disarmament. And I would appreciate if you could email that link perhaps to the chairman of our session so that we may all have that, because I would very much like to look into this issue a little bit further in the future. And I have a couple of questions for you regarding the current moment. Unfortunately, I don't see your last page right now, but I'll try to remember. Do you think that, that now is the right moment to renew or to extend the treaty with Russia, and also to adopt a no first use initiative, because and also maybe that could be used as a lever to persuade Putin to step down from his aggressive moves in Ukraine and elsewhere. Because in my mind, there is no doubt that his quarrel is not with Ukraine, but with the Western liberal order, and he will not stop there if Ukraine falls. So perhaps Biden should use these two things. I don't think Putin will be interested in renewing the treaty at this time, but the no first use could be used as a lever in persuading him to de-escalate the war. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes, the treaty was renewed in February 2021, and it goes on till it expires in 2026. So there's no leverage there. On no first use, you know, when there have been exercises, war games, and then, you know, one side or the other uses nuclear weapons first. The experience has been that it doesn't end until there's basically both sides have used their nuclear weapons and there's a global Armageddon. So I think I think Sakharov would agree that the only responsible position is no first use. The Russian position is is that the enunciated doctrine, although it's certainly inconsistent with what Putin has been saying recently, is that Russia will use nuclear weapons only if the existence of the state is at risk. Now, in fact, he's been threatening the use of nuclear weapons if the West crosses a line in support of Ukraine, and an unspecified line. So that's completely irresponsible. But for us to feed into that kind of dynamic and say, well, maybe we'll use nuclear weapons first, I think just puts the global civilization at risk. It's terrible what's happening in Ukraine, and
Can I offer a direct quote from Mr. Putin?
Yes.
If the world has no use for Russia, what use has Russia for the world? End quote.
Yeah, it's a very frightening time. It's a very frightening time, and I think, we many of us, most, including me, we thought that with the end of the Cold War, we had sort of ended the danger of nuclear war. Obviously, we're wrong, but we demobilized, and our physicist coalition is a part of an attempt to remobilize the physicists, and hopefully after this, if we don't have a nuclear war, after this crisis, the public also will give a higher priority to reducing the danger of nuclear war. Thank you, Tatiana.
I have a question, Dr. Hippel. This is Cheryl Spencer, who helped to arrange this session.
Thank you.
I thought the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty which Trump took us out of, was another of Putin's worries. And speaking of coming back into treaties as a off-ramp for Putin, we're looking for off-ramps to get Putin to agree that he doesn't need to be fighting a war in Ukraine. So what's your opinion on the INF treaty being restarted?
Yes, thank you, Cheryl, and thank you for all the work you've done to organize this session. Trump took us out of the INF treaty because of Russian violations. Russia accused the U.S. of violating the INF as well by deploying into Romania and Poland launch systems, which we said, and I think it's true, were for missile interceptors, to intercept missiles from Iran, which actually didn't materialize. So there was blames on both sides. The Biden administration Russia has offered to not deploy. It has in effect acknowledged that it has made intermediate range missiles. It has offered not to deploy them in Europe, and the U.S. Has offered to provide assurances that it doesn't have intermediate range missiles deployed in Western Europe, which would require some kind of verification that there are no missiles in those launchers in Poland and Romania, or or removal of those launchers. There, I think there's an open door. The U.S. has offered an open door as part of its diplomatic efforts to avoid what happened, which was the invasion of Ukraine, and that could be part of the off-ramp if Putin decides, not to continue with these atrocities that he's committing in connection with his attempt to take over Ukraine.
How much time do we have?
Just a little.
So I have another question.
So, yeah, so time maybe for another question.
Okay, I have another question and comment. So the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons is currently in force for the 57 countries who have ratified it. It seems to me that the abolition of nuclear weapons anywhere is really what we should all be aiming for. I'm disappointed that this APS program, nuclear threat reduction, doesn't actually address the TPNW, and my own influence on this has not been sufficient. But I would tell everybody that when you look at the 57 countries who've signed the TPNW, they represent 60% of the world's population. And the southern half of our world have declared themselves a nuclear-free zones, nuclear weapons-free zones. So all this talk of no first use and stuff is not sufficient. So and it's our Senate that has to ratify any treaty, including the TPNW. So Frank, what do you think we could be doing to get the TPNW ratified in more countries?
I agree with you, Cheryl, that this is a very important development, this movement for the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. The 5 nuclear weapon states that are acknowledged as such in the Non-Proliferation Treaty have all rejected that treaty. But I think, in fact, there's progress. And right now, globally, this is the biggest movement for nuclear disarmament, and I'm grateful to it. I think that the progress right now is actually not so much in the weapon states, but in the so-called nuclear umbrella states. There are about 30 countries which the U.S. has offered its nuclear umbrella to. The NATO states, Japan, South Korea, Australia, maybe a couple of others. And in those states, I think there is some of them, Germany, the Netherlands, for example, there really is some interest, and at least in participating as observer countries. But I think this will this is restarting the debates in those countries about in the NATO countries about NATO as a nuclear alliance, and whether they really want U.S. nuclear umbrella. Right now, I suspect that they do, but eventually they're going to have to give that up, or at least urge the U.S. to have a no first use policy, which in fact their governments have been urging the U.S. not to have been arguing against a no first use policy.
Thank you very much, Professor von Hippel.
Thank you.